Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana.
Thank you. I'm Randy Morger. I'm the chairman of the Greater Montana Foundation. Today is the 19th of April, 2013, and I have the extraordinarily great pleasure of doing a legacy interview with probably one of the greatest broadcasters that Montana has given birth to. Norma Ashby was on the air at KRTV, the studio that we're sitting in today, from 1962 to 1988, a more than 25-year history on the air almost literally every day as the host of the show Today in Montana. So we're going to talk to Norma and get some of the thoughts that you had about that sterling career and how you came into that, and then what you did following your career. So Norma, with that, I'm going to start not with a question, but with a story. As you know, I was a couple of weeks ago at a symposium, and one of the symposium sessions had to do with a lady from the Montana Historical Society who was talking about next year being a great year for Montana history because it's the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And she asked us, there were probably about 15 of us in this symposium, to list the greatest Montana women that we knew from the 20th century. And so some names came out. Jeanette Rankin was out there. Dorothy Johnson, the great author, was in there. Louise Coble, who did so much for the Blackfeet, was there. Myrna Loy, of course. And the other name that was named often was you, Norma Ashby, being an outstanding Montanan, woman Montanan from the 20th century. How does that make you feel?
Well, I'm very flattered. And of course, all those names you mentioned, very wonderful women. I've met all of those except Jeanette Rankin. And that is one of my greatest regrets, that I never met her, because I had my show while she was still alive. She came in the 70s and spoke to the legislature, and I think she spoke to the Constitutional Convention. So that would have been a thrill for me to have met a woman of her stature.
Well, it must be something to be ranked with women of that stature.
Well, it is very much, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
So let's go back all the way to the beginning. Let's talk about the early years. First of all, kind of give me a little bit about where you were born and raised, okay, and going through school, maybe up through the University of Montana, and you heading off to, well, first the Independent Record and then to New York.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Helena during the earthquake era. My mother said that the hospital was shaking when I was coming into the world, so I guess I was destined to shake things up from the beginning. Raised the first 5 years of my life out on a ranch near Winston, Montana, which is between Helena and Townsend. On my great-grandfather's ranch, he was the homesteader, first homesteader in Broadwater County, and came to Montana in 1862. So that makes me a four-generation Montanan. Right. And then from there, graduated from Central High School, where I had my one crack at being an actress. I was on stage in the 8th grade doing a play, and my mother had me destined to be a wonderful actress. But then I got to high school, Helena High, and I got introduced to journalism, and I had to make a choice between working on my school paper and my school yearbook and drama, and you just couldn't do it all. Not at that time, anyway. Maybe the kids today try to do that, but I chose journalism, so very active in my newspaper and yearbook, and loved both of those. And so right out of high school, 17 years old, I told my mother, I'm going to go work for the Independent Record as a reporter. And she said, are you sure you're going to get the job? I said, yes, I am. At that point in my life, I was more self-confident than any other time. Oh. And I went right down to the Independent Record and said, here I am, I'm ready to go to work. And they said, we don't have an opening. I said, I'm going to wait till you have one. And I went home. She said, did you get the job? I said, no, but I will. And by gosh, the next day they called and they said, guess what? We do have an opening.
And this was, now you've gone to the University of Montana.
No, this is right out of high school.
Oh.
Right out of high school.
Okay.
Just graduated from Helena High.
Okay.
So I worked at the Independent Record for 3 summers. But then I did go on the University of Montana, majored in journalism. And I mean, I knew that I was going to be in journalism the time I was 12. I just loved to write. And I wrote my first book at the age of 12, The Mystery of the Lost Caverns, kind of like a Nancy Drew mystery.
I want to read it sometime.
Well, I think I lost it. Isn't that horrible? I used to read it to the grade school kids. But at any rate, then graduated from the University of Montana. and decided my sister had gone to New York and Europe, and I thought I'm going to do what she did. So right out of college, I went to Europe for 1 month, 30 days, 11 countries in 30 days. If it
Okay.
was Tuesday, we're in Italy, Wednesday, you're in Germany. And
You
so
were traveling with someone?
a tour, a student
tour,
tour.
okay.
Got to Paris, and here was an ad in the New York Herald Tribune about an opening at a French English magazine called Realite. I thought, oh, I think I'm going to apply for that job. I had the nerve to apply, and it was a really hard application. It said, how many miles are 800 kilometers? And I had no idea. And then it said, then came this question. I looked and I thought, my gosh, and I put in the answer. And when I went back, they said, you are the first woman in the history of Realite to know the answer to the question. And it was, what is the capital of Montana? And they were going to hire me, but by then I'd lost my courage, and we returned with my girlfriends to New York. We decided to stay, and I called my mother and I said, I'm going to stay in New York, and she said, I'm going to send you $100. If you don't have a job in 1 week, you're coming home.
Okay.
So went right to Life magazine, said, here I am, and they laughed. They said, you're the first person in the history of Life from Montana to apply for a job, and they hired me at Life. So I worked at Life magazine for over a year in the picture department with some of the great photographers.
How about
And then
that?
I worked with another magazine, MD Medical News magazine, as a picture researcher. And then after 4 years, we formed the Montana Club in New York while we were there too, and we had 700 members, all these alumni from U of M and MSU. So that was fun.
And I had heard even then, I think Chet Huntley came
Yes,
to one of
yes,
those
he did, and that's how we got
sessions.
acquainted.
Yeah.
And also, I met Gary Cooper while I was back
Right,
there too, and of course, he's from Helena too.
Now let me go back.
Okay.
So you're in New York, but let me go back to start again. So growing up, brothers, sisters. You
Yeah, I
had
had-
the one
I had
sister.
one sister.
Had the one sister. And you're in Helena in the mid 50s, early to mid 50s. So I'm wondering at that time. Of course, I don't even know that there was television in Helena at that time. Certainly radio.
Yeah.
Did you have an aspiration at any point to be on the air?
No, I never thought about it.
Okay.
So then I came back to Great Falls because my sister lived here and she was dying of cancer. And
Correct.
so I came for a family reason. And so when I was here, I thought, okay, I'm just going to stay, and went right to the Tribune and thought, well, here I am with this experience. And they said, we don't have an opening. And I couldn't get a job in the field of journalism.
And you put into KARR radio.
Yeah, for a
and
radio
nothing
job
there.
in a PR firm here.
Right.
And so I ended up as a clerk in the farm supply store in Graham and Ross. And that's where I was discovered.
Okay, now let's talk about that. So,
Well,
so
I was
talk about the
I was
discovery.
selling, dog food and hamster feed and manure and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, a salesman from KRTV, Ed Coleman, came in and was introduced to me and learned about my journalism background. And he said, well, KRTV is looking at hiring someone for a morning show. He said, why don't you go up and apply to Dan Snyder, who owns the station? So I thought, oh, television. I've never done any television, but I thought, well, I don't want to be a clerk for the rest of my life. So I came up to KRTV, applied for the job. They said, well, why do you think you can do this? You have no experience in television. I said, well, I've always loved people. I love to ask questions, and I've been asking questions since I was born, since I could talk. Like, who's that and what's that?
Right.
Well, whatever I did, they liked what I said, and they hired me. And I went on the air for the first time on February 19th, 1962.
And you were very well at ease. I know that wasn't a nervous
No,
event.
I was scared to death. I was scared to death. And I said to Dan, my gosh, what should I do? I said, I've never been on TV before. And this red light was about ready to go on. And I said, could you give me any advice? And he said, yes. He said, don't swear and don't pick your nose on the air.
And I'll bet that stood you in good stead.
Well, and then of course I laughed, and that just broke down my fear, and away we went. And the best lesson that happened to me that first week was that I was laughing and having so much fun that this viewer wrote in. She said, I can't stand your laugh, and what's worse, you're making Dan laugh the way you did. So anyway, I think this is fun to share with you a couple of pictures.
Well,
from-
and as you describe
Yeah.
that, also describe
yeah.
because we're in about the same place as where the KRTV
No,
studios were.
our
right?
original was across the road.
Oh, okay.
In the old
okay.
Quonset hut.
So it was a Quonset hut.
Oh yeah, Quonset hut.
And KRTV had been on the air for how long?
About
when you got
4
the job?
years.
About 4 years.
I think they went on about 58, and I started in 62.
Okay.
Yeah, but this was the two of us, Dan Snyder, my boss, and me, on the very first day of the show, and you can see. The set in the background shows the stack, which looks like it's coming right out of Dan's head, but it was black and white TV. And then this picture shows our crew, and this shows that we had a woman camera girl, we had a boom operator woman, and we had an exercise girl, and then me. So Dan was in the minority there in that little crew. Isn't that fun? So that was our set.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask about, because in your book, the movie stars and rattlesnakes, I wanted there was a part there where you said, and you apparently had not been on the air a long time, I guess perhaps a week or so, and you're interviewing someone, and Dan just walks off.
Right. Yeah, this was right. He knew that I had to be able to make it on my own, and he was helping me initially, and then he just left me. And it was an interview about basketball, to talk 15 minutes about basketball. There's none of these 1.3, 1 minute, 30-second interviews in those days. It was 15 minutes. And so I asked every possible thing I could think of regarding basketball, but fortunately I was a fan of basketball, so that helped.
And this is all live TV?
Oh, I was saying absolutely everything was live.
Yeah.
And what was really funny, one time a set, what do you call it, a curtain caught fire, and Dan jumped up and grabbed the fire extinguisher. He said, keep talking, keep talking. So I said, there goes Dan, running across the street with a fire extinguisher. He's putting it out. We're trying to save the station. And anyway, it was a lot of fun to be in that era.
Now, going back to those early days again, so you were on-air talent, and then did you really start to be a producer from the beginning? I mean, obviously, you had to mold your own show. There was nothing much else like this in Montana.
No, it was called
at the
Today
time,
in
right?
Montana. It followed
Yeah.
the Today Show
Yeah.
on NBC. That's when we were still an NBC affiliate. And Dan, being the owner, he was so happy to give me the reins. And that would not happen today, I don't think, where you're also producing and being on the air. And I also sold commercials too. I did a little of everything. And then he gave me the opportunity to produce documentaries too. And I did about 21 documentaries. And that's when the local stations made time for that kind of thing. So it was a fabulous era.
Did you ever get the feeling, and this is one of the things that I thought about as I was reading your book, is that for a 20 or 25 year period, you were really an agenda setter in Montana. And what I mean by that is by the people that you chose to interview and by the types of shows that you put out, you sort of were the conversation starter for a big area of Montana every day. Did that ever occur to you, what the
Well-
role of agenda setting?
Well, I guess not, but not put like that, but it's very kind of you. But I was given so much freedom to do what I wanted to do my motto was to present positive things that were going on in the community and positive people. And I wanted to lift people up every day and give them something to think about. We always had a poem of the week, a thought for the day, flower of the month, and we had birthday box drawings. We had all these things. And one of my most memorable moments is when we had our Father of the Year nominee, and your father received that honor from all your kids, all his kids. And he was thrilled, and I was thrilled for him.
Something that he still talks about today, and he was going to be celebrating his 90th birthday in about a week. And that was one of the highlights of his life.
Yeah, well, it was a highlight.
To receive that
it was a
from you.
highlight for me, too.
What an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Well, let's go through a couple of because you had, the guests ranged literally, like I say, every famous person or important person in Montana appeared to cross your show at one time or another.
Well, I have some of my favorite pictures here. Of course, the really thrilling moment was meeting JFK. And he was here in 1963, 2 months before his assassination. And this picture was taken in Memorial Stadium at Great Falls High School. And There were more people in Great Falls, Montana that day than any other day before or since. There were over 100,000 people.
Wow.
Busloads of children came in to see him, and they were all lined along the route from the airplane to the stadium. They were hanging from trees, from rooftops, and it was a glorious moment. And he truly was not only the president, but the rock star of the era.
Right.
Tall man, tan man, and very congenial, and a very good speaker. So that was a thrill. And then, of course, meeting President Reagan, and this was when he was still governor of California with Governor Babcock, and that was when he was here at the Rainbow for a reception, so that was exciting to meet him. Meeting First Lady Pat Nixon at the White House was a real treat for me. Very lovely, gracious lady. Then we get into the folks that came for the fair, and of all the fair talent, Bob Hope was my very, very favorite. And this was down at a press conference in the Rainbow Hotel. Another thrilling person to meet was Clint Eastwood when he was here for the filming of Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. And this was down at Hussman's Pool Hall. And as you can imagine, I was really nervous to be in the presence of such a handsome, this was when he was in his early 40s, and very, very handsome man. And I thought, what can I do to make me more comfortable and make him loosen up? So here we were in this pool hall, and I went up to him and I said, Clint, what's a nice guy like you doing in a place like this? And he laughed. He thought that was a scream. And then, of course, Johnny Cash was here for a concert. And a thrill for me was having Paul Harvey come to Cascade, Montana. And I was riding in the same car behind him, and he whispered to me, he says, now, if you see anybody in the crowd that you know, mention their name to me, and I will speak to them. I saw my mother, Ella Memke, along the parade route, and I said, that's Ella. So he yelled out to my mom as he passed, hello, Ella. And my mother said, oh my goodness, Paul Harvey knew my name. But, you know, where the kids really got their money's worth is when he got on the air the next day and talked about being in Cascade, Montana. So that,
and I read that script from what he did.
Yeah.
What a lovely
and
thing
you know,
that
he
was.
did his graduation for them in the football field. There were like 5,000 people there, and all the ranches around the area donated beef, so everybody had a wonderful meal as well. And then the Lennon sisters came to town, and there they are. And I still watch them on Saturday night with all the reruns of Lawrence Welk's show. So those are just some of the big names, and then of course we have lots of Montana names too that we like. And I don't know if you want to go on to another subject or you want to stay with some of these.
Let me talk about it because
Okay.
you mentioned Paul Harvey and the lovely thing that he wrote about Cascade.
Yeah.
But you had going now, perhaps a little bit separately from today in Montana. You had a number of occasions. I know that you had several essays that made it into the congressional record. So in your own writing career and some of those things that you did, talk to me a little bit about the special projects that you did during that time. Documentaries, for example. You did the
Okay.
one with Chet Huntley.
Yeah, I wrote a show called Last Chance Gulch about my hometown. And it was for the centennial of Helena, and I thought, who could be the best narrator for this? So I just, you know, here I am again being confident like I was when I was 17. I sent the script off to Chet, and I said, Chet, you have the best voice. I said, would you be willing to narrate this documentary for me? And I said, I can't promise you any money, but I can promise you fame. So he laughed. He said, oh, sure, just send me the script. So he did. And he only changed, I think, 2 words in that whole script. And one was about the hangings at Helena. And I had written, you know, an axe-wielding minister, and he added a sky pilot, because that's how they were referred to.
Okay.
And then when I was talking about the dancing girls, the hurdy-gurdy girls, he called them the ubiquitous. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's that mean? And it meant they were everywhere. Okay. So but those were the only 2 changes. And his golden voice just made such a difference.
So you did that, but you did a number of documentaries.
Oh yeah, I
through
did
the
a lot
years.
of different ones, yeah. I did one on my family's steam collection called Gentle Giants, the last big thrashing bee out at the Memke Museum. And then I did one about an ace in the hole, putting in the missiles out here at Alpha 1. gosh, I did one on Virginia City, and of course, since I left the show, we did one a couple years ago on Great Falls, called The Great Falls Story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to make sure that we've got for posterity are some of the special events that you did. And I know that, for example, during Fair Week, and we've talked a little bit about Bob Hope and some of the other stars who came through at that time, but you literally were on the air for 8-10 hours a day during Fair. Describe that a little bit.
From 8 in the morning till 6 at night for a week. And we had our whole setup out there, all our cameras out there. It was quite an adventure. Before we got more sophisticated and had shade, one year I was going at both ends. I mean, I had stomach flu. It was pretty tough because that heat just got to me. But we interviewed every blue ribbon winner on the fairground, every night show performer, everybody, all the rodeo stars, and that was tough because, for example, what's his face, the largest of all the rodeo people that I can think of. Anyway, he only could say yup and nope. And he was almost as tough to interview as Senator Mike Mansfield, because Mike Mansfield
who was quite taciturn.
Very, very hard to interview. You'd have these long questions, he'd say yes and no. And what do? You have 5 pages of questions and he answers them in 1 minute. So there you are. But it was really fun to be out in the fair and go around and eat all the wonderful food and meet all the great people that put their heart and soul into the fair.
And then some of the other things during that era, and again, you'll have to forgive me, I'm a few years younger than you, but I remember watching you on television, and that's why I talked about the agenda setting, because I remember my mom would watch in the morning and would exercise along with the exercise lady. But you had other special events that were perhaps tied into Today in Montana. And your Christmas program, for example, talk a little bit about how those would come together.
Had all the children of the cast on. And never forget when my little grandson made his first debut on TV, he ran all over the set. He wasn't about to be confined to the set. He was running all over the studio and everything. So that was fun. And Dan Snyder's little kids were on. And so that was memorable too. Yeah.
And then you had some special anniversary programs. I think the 15th, I don't recall anything on the 10th, but the 15th, 20th, and 25th.
Right.
Could you
they
give
were
a little
wonderful
bit more
too.
about...
Yeah, we'd get all these special greetings from all of these people that had been a part of it. On the 15th anniversary show, Senator Lee Metcalf and his wife Donna sent me a special greeting, and they said, well, Donna was my Bluebird leader in Campfire, and they said we knew the minute Donna had Norma in her troupe that she'd be successful because she was the little girl in Donna's group that talked all the time. So.
Well, and maybe this would be a good time to go through some of the Montanans.
Yeah, the Montanans, Okay, well, of course, I met Chet Huntley when I lived in New York, and then when I went back with the Centennial train in 1964, I gave him a Centennial Medal, and there we are in his office with his father's railroad desk at NBC. And then when I talk to children about my career, they are most interested in this gentleman, and his name is Evel Knievel. And we caught up with him in his studio in Butte, and he was an artist, and I don't think a lot of people ever knew that. And he couldn't get any insurance because he was a daredevil motorcycle artist, so he had to put all his money into fabulous diamond and gold rings, and we're wearing a couple of his rings there, and one is in the shape of a motorcycle.
I see.
Isn't that fun? And of course, here's a picture with Senator Metcalf, and I'm so proud of him and what he did for preservation. The Metcalf wilderness areas over in the Bitterroot is saved. And then here's somebody that a lot of Montanans loved, is Stan Line with his his wonderful comic strip, and Bud Guthrie, our Pulitzer Prize winner, with his wonderful books. Favorite of mine has always been Bob Scriver with his wonderful sculptures. And then of all the educators I had the opportunity to meet, Ira Perkins was one of my most memorable ones up at Bynum. He had that school for over 50 years, and every day he had physical exercise for the kids, music, and instruments. They all played something, and he was just a memorable person, and everybody loved him. And when they'd have graduation from the 8th grade, they'd all go to Shoto High School, and they'd all have dances because they all could dance. That's what was so wonderful. Yeah.
Now, this leads me to a surprise question, which I just thought about.
Okay.
In all of those years, was there ever anyone who you absolutely could not get to be on the show that you would have
Oh,
wanted to have
yeah.
on the show?
That's a good question. There was one woman, it was Mrs. Leo Graybill Jr. And her husband, of course, was in charge of the Constitutional Convention. But in my earliest days of the era, I researched a lot of people that were living in Great Falls, and she had had a fabulous career in radio as a radio actress in Chicago.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, that would be interesting to hear about that. So I called her up and asked her, and she wouldn't do it.
Oh, for heaven's
She
sake.
said, no, I'm Mrs. Leo Graybill Jr. That's my role now. But we became friends later, but I was so disappointed. I thought, oh, that would have been so interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one of the questions that apparently as we go through these legacy interviews, we're asking all of the people who are participating, and that is, as you look back over that 25-year period, what would you call your most embarrassing moment?
Okay, well, I don't know if I call it embarrassing. I call it my most memorable moment and my most memorable guest. And that was the guest with the rattlesnake.
Go ahead.
Can I tell about
Go
that?
ahead.
Okay.
We have 4 minutes.
Okay. Well, it won't take a long time, but this is the rattlesnake that Cyril Kolarczyk from Rainsford came on the show with, and he did all these things with it. He held it up to the camera and opened its mouth and put a pencil in it so you could see its fangs, and then the climax came when he put it back down on the floor, stepped on its head. Oh, I hate to even show this picture. But he took out a knife and slit it all the way down, and 13 baby rattlesnakes spilled out onto the floor. And I won't show it any longer because it's pretty awful. And he skinned the snake, and he gave the snake skin to my camera girl, Susie, and then he cut off the rattles and put them in my hand, and they were still moving. I couldn't speak. I was so shocked.
And the baby rattlers in the meantime.
Yeah, and in the meantime, somebody in the studio audience rushed up with a shovel, scooped them up, flew out the back door, and buried them because they are poisonous too. Well, of all the interviews that I did, that was the most memorable and the most embarrassing because I'm paid to talk and I couldn't speak. And after it was all over, his wife who'd come with him just screamed at him, said, "If you ever do a thing like that again, I am going to divorce you." So that was a memorable experience.
Well, we have just a couple of minutes, but one of the things that I wanted to be sure that we touched on, as we moved into that the later years, the last couple of years, by this time you'd gone statewide, the program had been refocused. We're no longer really locally owned, but rather corporately owned. Was it sort of for that reason that you decided to give up doing the program in Care TV?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the reason. Everything changed. It was a corporate entity now, not a local. And so I just thought, it's run its course, and I'd rather go out while I'm still here and up here, and instead of, well, when's she going to leave, So.
But since then, you've maintained an extraordinarily active life.
Oh, I have, and I love broadcasting to this day, and that's why that's why I'm part of this project with you. And we switched roles here because I'm doing interviews too with our wonderful legacy people around Montana, and I'm so happy we're doing this to preserve their stories. Yeah.
Philosophical for just a couple of minutes. So you were really in the heyday of broadcasting, and we've seen that incredible shift of not only corporate ownership, but also the granularity, where now if somebody wanted to watch the History Channel and only the History Channel for their entire lives, they could do that. What do you think that does to the sense of community for a place like that?
Well, it's really hard. I mean, when I was on the air, there were 2 channels in Great Falls. Now there's like 500.
Yeah.
So I really felt, like you said, it was the heyday when I was on the air, where broadcasting really brought people together. And now we all have our own separate likes, and maybe there's some advantage to that, but it was a great community entity at the time. And now we have so many diversions through all the social media as well. Yeah. So I'm just really glad that young people today don't have any idea what it was like 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Well, luckily there are still some videotapes.
Yep, there are.
Luckily we have your book.
Yeah.
Are you doing any other books? Have you thought about
I've been asked to do more.
Else?
I'm just enjoying my life now. I was married 42 years to my dear Shirley Ashby and have 2 adult children and 3 grandsons and 3 great-grandchildren, so I'm enjoying my family very, very much. And if I'm to do another book, maybe I will at some point.
Well, Norma, we wish you all the very, very best, and it has been an extraordinary pleasure to interview you for this legacy project. And we look forward to seeing you somewhere around a TV studio again. In the
Thank you,
near future.
Randy. You did a
Thank
great
you,
job.
Norma.
Thank you.
This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.